Today, we'll be looking at how we are God's representatives in the world. How as we are made in the image and likeness of God, and how now we are believers, we live as God's representatives in the world. We'll be looking at it from the second chapter of the book of Romans, the 17th through the 24th verse. So, grab your Bible, open it up to 2nd Romans, grab a cup of coffee if you'd like, and let's get to it. So in the second chapter of the book of Romans, starting in the 17th verse, we read, "Now you, if you call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and approve of what is superior because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light to those who are in the dark, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. You then, who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." Again, lots going on here. Yesterday we saw how in verses 12 through 16, in chapter 2, 12 through 16, we saw how as we have faith in God, as we believe, we live a life of love. That it's both and. Our faith is also something we do. Faith is also an action lived out. We saw that yesterday in the text. And today we see that theme continues. So Paul now switches to just the Jews. And we know through the Old Testament, through the Hebrew texts, and through all of this, and through the Gospels, what Christ was saying to the teachers of the law, the scribes, the Pharisees, their whole role, part of their job was to take God to the world. They were to be that light in the darkness. They were to be that guide and that instruction to those who were not Jews. The Jews were God's chosen people in the Old Testament so that they could reveal God to all of the earth. I mean, that was always their goal. From the very beginning, from Abraham, the promise to Abraham was a promise to all people on the earth. God was always working for everyone. Israel was just supposed to be the conduit. Israel was supposed to be God's chosen people. In that, God chose them to help reveal God's character and nature and love to the rest of the world. And so Paul here now in chapter 2, starting in verse 17, Paul is saying to them, you are supposed to be a teacher, a light in the darkness. So if you're teaching people how to live righteously, if you're teaching people how to live in love, are you doing that yourself? Should you not also be teaching yourself? Because if you teach people one thing, but you don't do it yourself and you break it yourself and you live a different way, then he's saying that reveals something about God to others. We are God's representatives on earth. There's something that as a teenager, as a kid, I used to think a lot that I don't think as much anymore, but that I used to think a ton when I was a kid, when I was younger. And something I've heard plenty of people say is, man, it would be so much easier if Christ just came down today, or it'd be so much easier if God were just standing in front of me so that I could see God and I could see who God is, what God's all about, and I could understand. It'd be so much easier. I mean, yeah, I guess, but also that's what we're for. Those of us who believe, those of us who live a life of love because we have faith in God. That's our job. I mean, Jesus said, blessed are those who having not seen believe. But also more than that, Jesus says you are to be a light on a hill, a city on a hill. You are to be the salt of the earth. We are now called to be the ones who represent God in the world. People should know. I mean, the old hymn, the old song, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. And so it's that same kind of thing that we represent God in everything we do. So people who see us and know that we're Christians know what God is. They learn God's character from who we are and what we do. That's part of the reason why we live in a culture now that has such a bad taste in their mouth, so to speak, about God, and that doesn't know what to feel towards God. Because we live in a time now where there's a whole generation of people who have been hurt by the church. And I'm not saying Azalea Park United Methodist Church. I'm saying the church in general, that the church has hurt people. The church has not always lived in love. And when the church hurts people, when the church doesn't live in love and doesn't live the way that we're teaching others that we should all be living as believers, when the church doesn't do that, and when the church is seen as hypocrites, then people associate that to God. I mean, what is it? Gandhi, I think it was, said, like, I don't know about your church, but I love your Jesus. I just don't know about your church. Or he said something like that. And I feel like that's a sentiment in our culture right now. Well, I love your Jesus. I love that he's all about love and caring for others and being sacrificial towards others. I love the idea of your God, that your God is love, but I don't know that God is love because the way the church acts is not that. Very often the way the church acts is it hurts people. It doesn't love people. It doesn't live the way that we're teaching the character of God. We're not living as the character of God. And that's what we see here in the second chapter of Romans 17 through 24, because the Jews, before the church existed, before Christ died and raised, and before the church started at Pentecost, before Paul went out and planted churches, the Jews were supposed to be that for the world. The Jews were supposed to be those who went out and showed people the character and the nature of God. And so Paul is saying to them as well, and now says to us, the church, us, the Christians, us in the 21st century, those who profess and say that they believe in God. He is saying, if you have the knowledge, and in verse 20, as an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? And here, and we could go back towards chapter 1 and see that list again of slanderers, murderers, strife, deceit, envy, greed, wickedness, and all those things. We could see that again. But Paul is not giving an exhaustive list here in the second chapter because he doesn't need to. He gives enough by saying, do you preach against stealing, but do you steal? And we could now take that to a multitude of things. But at the end of the day, at the heart of it, as Jesus says too about the heart of the law, you who preach to love your enemy, to love your neighbor, do you hate? You who preach to love others, do you slander? You who preach to care and love and see the worth and value in the others around you, do you call names? Do you say bad things? Do you hurt others with your language? Because if so, as it says in verse 24, as it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Perhaps what it means to take the Lord's name in vain is to say that you believe, to let everyone know that you're a Christian, and to not live with the love of God. I mean, reminds me of my daily reading too from the other day from Hebrews and 1st and 2nd Peter, when it's talking about that same kind of thing. It's throughout the gospel and throughout the New Testament, this idea of how we live represents God in the world. And how we live also shows what we truly believe. If you believe Christ died for you, and yet you go on sinning, yet you go on not loving others, hurting others, yet you go on doing the things that you know that aren't becoming of love and being a follower of Christ, then you spit on the cross. If you don't live a different, changed life, then you basically say with your life, the cross has no meaning for you. Christ died, but if we go on sinning, if we go on living a life that does not represent that kind of self-sacrificial love, if we live a life that is not based on love, then we basically say that the cross has no meaning for us. We spit on it. Because we show that even though Christ died for us, we don't really care. We're just going to keep on doing what we want to do. That's why it's so important for those of us who confess to be Christians to live a life of love so that we show others the character and nature of God. And then we truly do become made in the image and likeness of God because we are going out into the world and showing others the love of God through our lives. Something I've thought before too is, and maybe this is you. I don't have any stickers or anything on my car, but that's kind of almost more just because I don't want to put bumper stickers on my car and maybe have to peel them off someday or have them ruin the paint. But I'm sure you've seen around town Jesus fish on cars or bumper stickers or things that profess that someone is a Christian. Now imagine if that bumper sticker with what would Jesus do on it, or that bumper sticker of a cross or the Jesus fish cuts someone off in traffic, or does something reckless while driving. Imagine what that tells others about Jesus. Because everything, if we profess to be Christians, if we let people know that we follow Christ, then we are Christ to them. The way we live, what we do, represents Christ and represents God in the world. If we truly believe that Christ died and that we know that Christ is love, that God's character and nature is love, why would the church be declining in the West? Why would the church be declining in our country? Why would the number of people in churches be decreasing? Because the only thing I can think of is that the church hasn't been living the way we were called to. The church hasn't been accurately representing Christ and Christ's love in the world. And yes, we're broken people who sin, but we're also called towards perfection. As Christ says at the end of chapter 5 in Matthew, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. We're called towards that. We're called to love more, to love deeper, to take it beyond to the next level. So we need to do that. And if we do that and we represent Christ right, we don't have to worry about the church because people will see that and they will know we are Christians by our love. But if we don't do that, then we blaspheme God among others. We tarnish God's name in the world. We run God's name through the mud when we call ourselves Christians and don't live in love. So I hope that God adds a blessing to your understanding today. I hope that the Spirit speaks to you so that you hear what God wants to say to you today. I pray that you are blessed in the Spirit and that you are blessed in the knowledge of God, and then you can live in that love for others in the world, representing God. And I hope you have a great rest of your day today. And I would just want to say thank you for watching today. Thank you for being a part of these daily devotions as we try to learn what it means to live in love in the world and live like Christ so that we can represent Christ and represent God's character to the world. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.